Welcome back, time travelers. The British royal family? You know, they're actually just a subsidiary. What if I told you the House of Windsor only exists today because they were bought and paid for by their greatest rival? I mean, forget the cinematic threat of King George VI. That's just the Hollywood version. Behind the velvet curtains, the year was 1940, and the British Empire was, well, it was bankrupt. Not just low on cash. I mean, eviction notice broke. While the Luftwaffe rained fire on London, the real threat wasn't a Nazi invasion, right? It was a bank balance of exactly zero. The crown jewels? They were metaphorically sitting in a pawn shop window. Just imagine that. But here's the part they don't teach you in history class. Uncle Sam didn't come to save democracy. He came to perform a hostile, corporate takeover. We called a special relationship. But the declassified ledgers? They cart a liquidation sale. Every ship, every secret base, and the very sovereignty that creates self-tree for survival. Stick around, time travelers, because in 3 minutes, I'm going to show you the literal receipt that turned the British Empire into a franchise of the American dream. I mean, do you really think a king can be royal if he's on someone else's payroll? Hello, time travelers. Look at this footage. Churchill and FDR smiling. The special relationship that saved the world, right? Wrong. You see, the history books call it a noble crusade, a selfless gift from America to London. But here's the truth they actually don't teach you in school. It was a rescue. It was a heist. Behind closed doors, the atmosphere wasn't charitable, it was purgatory. Washington wasn't watching the front lines. They were watching the British treasury like vultures, just waiting for the bank account to hit zero. FDR knew Britain was desperate, and he squeezed them until they bled. For a single free tank ride, the US forced Britain to a fire sale of their entire global empire. I mean, imagine selling your house for pennies just to buy a loaf of bread? That was Britain in 1941. They were forced to liquidate giant companies like American Viscose for next to nothing. Churchill secretly fumed to his cabinet. They are stripping us clean. Washington wasn't just fighting Nazis. They were dismantling their biggest global competitor. Gets even darker. You think losing the money was bad? Wait until you hear the one demand the US made that nearly shattered the alliance. A demand so cold-blooded it targeted the very soul of the British Navy. Are you ready for the real cost of help? Hello, time travelers. Picture this. June 1940. London is screaming under air raid sirens. Right? While the public hulls and shelters. A silent heist happening in the shadows. A convoy of trucks is creeping through the black eye, and they aren't carrying food, you see. They aren't even carrying medicine. They are carrying the literal lifeblood of an empire. This was Operation Fish, the largest movement of wealth in human history. Think about that. 1,500 tons of gold bullion, centuries of accumulated wealth, loaded onto warships like the HMS Errol and shoved right into the jaws of a U-boat in Fish Atlantic. But here's the terrifying truth the history books hide from you. This was for safekeeping, right? It was a ransom. You see, President Roosevelt's cash and carry policy was brutal. No gold, no goods. To Washington, the special relationship wasn't a brotherhood, it was a cold-blooded pawn shop transaction. And it gets worse. When the gold ran out, the demands turned predatory. Enter the destroyers for bases, Geel. On paper, The US gave Britain 50 destroyers. The reality? They were flushdeckers, leaking, war I scrap heaps. Basically floating coffins. Exchanged for this junk. The US seized 99-year leases on strategic bases for Newfoundland all the way to the Caribbean. While London was burying, America was systematically strip mining the British Empire. Base by base, colony by colony. Churchill was paying the king's rent with the very soil of the empire. But even the gold and the land wasn't enough to satisfy the American appetite. Because there was one more secret, a hidden blueprint for a technology so powerful, it would dwarf the value of every gold bar in the vault. And the Americans, well, they were coming for that, too. Believe it or not, the British Empire didn't end a battlefield and in suitcase. Imagine King George VI not as a sovereign, mind you, as a CEO watching his multinational corporation go completely bust. The gold? Gone. The shits? Traded. You see, the Americans didn't want his crown. No, they wanted his brain. Enter the Tizard Mission A small black box handler to Washington. Inside wasn't jewelry, was the very soul of British innovation. Blueprints for the cavity magnetron, jet engines, and the terrifying secrets of the atomic bomb. This wasn't per issue, time travelers. It was a hostile takeover. While the world saw a special relationship, George VI saw the leash being tightened. Every single American dollar came with a tether, pulling the UK deep into the shadows. The British lion wasn't just wounded, it was being put in a cage. But wait, it gets darker. While the king was signing away the empire's future, someone was watching from the inside. Someone who knew that the biggest threat wasn't a bankrupt treasury, but a secret buried deep in the king's own bloodline. And that secret, well, it was about to go nuclear. Next time you see the crown jewels, I want you to look a little closer. Is that just a sparkle or is it a price tag? You see, you aren't just looking at history. You looking at collateral. Believe it or not, the British throne didn't survive World War II by some divine miracle. It was bailed out. And by who? Well, it was the rising superpower across the Atlantic. The US didn't just save the king, they bought a seat at the head of the table. Think this is just a theory? Explain this. Why it take until December 29th, 2006, a full 60 years later, for Britain to pay off its last war loan? While the world cheered for the Queen's coronation, the palace was quietly writing checks to Washington just to keep the lights on, right? The empire fell. The map was redrawn. But the show had to grow on. Today, the changing of the guard isn't just a tradition. It's a distraction. A magnificent mask hiding the exact moment the scepter was handed to the White House. The crown stayed in London. But the strings? They're pulled from DC history. Is it what's in our textbook? Time travelers. It's what's buried in the ledgers. You've been watching the stage, but the real play happened in the shadows. Ready to see who's actually holding the script? Smash that subscribe button for Signal Age. Don't look away, because the next secret is even darker. Stay curious, time travelers.